Some betrayals break your heart, but the worst betrayals break your direction. And the most dangerous part, you never see them coming. But what if I told you that God gives you early warning signs, 3 red flags you cannot afford to ignore? And if you stay with me all the way to the end, I'll show you the one truth that will not only protect your heart, but restore your strength faster than betrayal can break it. Betrayal doesn't start loud, it starts subtle. When people think about betrayal, they often picture a dramatic moment, an explosive confrontation, or a sudden act of deception that appears out of nowhere. But the truth, one that many people overlook until it's too late, is that authentic betrayal rarely enters your life with noise. It does not knock on the door, announce itself, or make its intentions clear. Betrayal begins quietly. It begins gently. It begins in ways so subtle, so soft, so almost unnoticeable that you can live through the first stages without recognizing anything is wrong. And that is what makes it dangerous. Betrayal is rarely a blow. It is a drift. In the beginning, what you experience is not an attack, but a shift. The shift is small enough that you can explain it away. You tell yourself they're tired, they're distracted, they're going through something. And maybe they are, but betrayal often hides inside those excuses. It wraps itself in what appears harmless, and you don't feel the weight of it until you suddenly realize you're standing in a moment where trust has already been broken. There is something deeply spiritual about this truth. In Scripture, betrayal didn't come with thunder. Judas didn't storm into Jesus' presence shouting his intentions. He didn't declare, "I'm going to betray you." Instead, Judas walked with Jesus for years. He laughed with him, served with him, prayed with him, ate with him. The betrayal began long before the kiss in the garden. It began in Judas's heart in the quiet places. No one saw it. No one suspected it. Not even the disciples who sat beside him every day. That is how betrayal always works. It is born in silence. It grows in secret. And by the time it reveals itself, the damage has already taken root. Most people think they'll spot betrayal when it arrives, but the subtle signs are what make it so easy to overlook. A person who once shared everything with you begins to share a little less. Not enough to alarm you, just enough that you sense something has shifted. Someone who once celebrated your victories with genuine joy now celebrates them with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Someone who once supported you wholeheartedly begins offering support with conditions attached. It's never obvious. It's never loud. It's never dramatic. It's subtle because betrayal always begins where trust once lived. The most painful part of betrayal is not the act itself. It's the slow erosion of loyalty leading up to it. You don't feel the first cracks because you believe the foundation is strong. You have history with this person. You have memories, deep conversations, shared moments, shared prayers, shared dreams. You don't expect betrayal from people you've invested your heart into. That's why it begins quietly, because if it arrived loudly, you would shut it down immediately. But betrayal needs access. Betrayal needs proximity. Betrayal needs familiarity. So it starts with something so small you don't even register it as a problem. Subtle betrayal can look like emotional distance. Someone who used to lean on you now pulls back. Someone who used to speak openly now gives short, guarded answers. Someone who used to value your presence now seems indifferent to it. But because the relationship has history, you overlook the signs. You assume they're fine. You assume things will go back to normal. You assume loyalty is still intact. What you don't realize is that betrayal rarely erupts. It accumulates. Sometimes betrayal begins with silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but an intentional one. A silence where someone begins withholding their thoughts, their feelings, their struggles, or their intentions. They stop involving you in decisions that affect you. They stop inviting you into the spaces where trust used to live. Silence becomes a barrier, and you can feel it forming even if you cannot describe it. The person who once confided in you now avoids vulnerability. They hide behind distance. They hide behind vague statements. And while none of it feels like betrayal yet, it is the birthplace of betrayal. Silence becomes the soil where disloyalty grows. Other times, betrayal starts with minimization. The minimization of your value, the minimization of your boundaries, the minimization of your time, your feelings, your presence. They begin taking you for granted. They begin assuming you'll always be there, always be the same, always be available. And slowly, your relationship becomes one-sided. They withdraw what they used to contribute. They ignore what they used to honor. They replace gratitude with entitlement. And although you sense the imbalance, you don't call it betrayal because it doesn't look like betrayal. It looks like change. But betrayal often hides behind the mask of change. Sometimes betrayal begins with increased secrecy. Not obvious secrecy, just subtle things. Conversations you're no longer included in, plans formed without your knowledge, decisions made without your input. People who used to be transparent with you now hide behind excuses like, "It wasn't important," or "I didn't think you needed to know." But what they hide isn't information, it's intention. When someone begins shifting their loyalty in a new direction, their secrecy serves as the camouflage that keeps you in the dark just long enough for betrayal to mature. It's also important to understand this. Betrayal often begins with self-justification. Before someone betrays you, they must internally justify why it's okay. So their mind begins rewriting the story. They minimize the good you've done for them. They magnify the flaws they've found in you. They begin creating a narrative where you deserve what they're planning. You don't hear these narratives because they're not spoken aloud. They happen internally, quietly, and progressively. And while you're still giving them your trust, they're mentally withdrawing theirs. There is a reason God warns our spirit before danger arrives. You don't always notice the red flags with your eyes, but you feel them in your heart. You sense something is shifting. You sense something is off. You sense a spiritual misalignment you can't articulate. Your spirit is reacting to something your mind hasn't identified yet. That's the Holy Spirit protecting you, not from betrayal itself, but from blindness to betrayal. God always alerts those He loves. He speaks in whispers because betrayal begins in whispers. He stirs your spirit because betrayal stirs in darkness. When betrayal begins subtle, God begins warning subtle. If you look back on the moments where you were betrayed, you'll often realize the signs were always there. A guarded conversation, a sudden defensiveness, a lack of eye contact, a strange increase in comparison or jealousy, a withdrawal of affection, a subtle change in tone. None of these appear destructive on their own, but betrayal does not build itself on one moment. Betrayal is a collection of small misalignments that eventually converge into a painful realization. And because the early signs are gentle, you often blame yourself for perceiving them. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. You tell yourself to let it go. But discernment is a gift, and many people mistake discernment for doubt. The subtle beginning of betrayal is not meant to torment you, it's meant to sharpen you. God allows you to notice the shift so you can prepare your heart, adjust your boundaries, and guard your spirit. The soft beginning of betrayal teaches you to pay attention not only to words, but to patterns. It teaches you to notice not only what someone says, but what someone withdraws. It teaches you to recognize when the emotional climate of a relationship changes, even if the behavior still looks familiar. Betrayal that begins subtle is a spiritual lesson in awareness. It reminds you that trust is a sacred thing and must be stewarded with wisdom, not assumption. Betrayal doesn't start loud, it starts subtle. Words stop matching actions. One of the earliest and clearest signs of true betrayal is not hostility, anger, or conflict. It's inconsistency. It's when someone's mouth keeps promising one thing, but their behavior keeps delivering another. This is one of the most reliable indicators that something in the relationship has shifted, because words are easy to say, but actions require loyalty, character, and sacrifice. A person can speak honor, but they cannot fake it in their behavior for long. Eventually, the truth appears in the gap between what they say and what they actually do. From the beginning of humanity, God has taught us to discern actions over words. Even Jesus emphasized that you know a tree by its fruit, not by its leaves. The leaves are surface level. They're what you see quickly, easily, and casually. They're the words someone speaks. But fruit takes time. Fruit is revealed only through consistency, patience, sacrifice, and repeated patterns. That's why words can deceive, but patterns expose. And betrayal often announces itself through the growing inconsistency between someone's vocal commitment and their lived-out loyalty. When someone is truly with you, their words and actions align almost effortlessly. They don't have to work hard to show loyalty because loyalty is who they are. But when betrayal begins brewing in someone's heart, you start feeling a strange disconnect. The way they talk about you feels warm, but their participation feels cold. They claim they care, but they're absent when care actually requires effort. They speak honorably in public, but they avoid responsibility in private. You don't see an explosion, you see erosion. One of the most unsettling feelings is when someone's compliments no longer match the energy of their presence. They might still say things like, "I'm here for you," but somehow they're never actually there in the moments you need them. They say, "You can count on me," yet you feel the slow realization that you actually can't. Their promises feel like air, light, empty, and without weight. Their actions feel delayed, minimized, or half-hearted. This misalignment is not random. It is evidence that their loyalty is no longer rooted in truth. The reason this inconsistency is so dangerous is because words give comfort, while actions reveal reality. When someone's words are comforting, you want to believe them. You want to preserve the relationship. You want to assume the best. But God does not tell us to assume the best blindly. He tells us to be wise, to be discerning, to recognize that smooth words can mask troubled motives. Some of the most harmful betrayals in Scripture came from people who used flattering words while hiding destructive intentions. Judas spoke respectfully to Jesus. Delilah spoke lovingly to Samson. Absalom spoke gently to David. Their mouths said one thing, but their hearts were moving in the opposite direction. The gap between words and actions is where betrayal begins to expose itself. It begins with subtle contradictions. Someone says they value your time, but repeatedly ignore it. They say they appreciate your presence, but consistently choose environments and people that distance themselves from you. They say they support your vision, but never contribute to it. They say they want peace, but their decisions keep creating conflict. And the longer you observe them, the more you realize their words feel scripted while their behavior feels authentic. And authenticity always wins. Actions always tell the truth. When betrayal is growing in someone's heart, they will often keep using loyal sounding language because they don't want to appear disloyal. They want the benefit of looking faithful while living faithless. That's why people who are drifting away from integrity tend to increase their verbal reassurance. It's a psychological pattern. They feel guilty internally, so they overcompensate verbally. They know their behavior is changing, but they don't want you to notice yet. So they cover actions with words. They cover distance with reassurance. They cover the shift with exaggerated devotion. But if you pay close attention, you'll recognize the mismatch. A healthy person does not need to keep repeating how loyal they are. Loyalty speaks for itself. Loyalty is shown, not said. Loyalty is demonstrated, not declared. When someone's loyalty becomes something they talk about more than something they walk out, that's not loyalty anymore. That's performance. And performance is often used by people who are trying to hide the fact that their heart has already left the room. Sometimes the mismatch between words and actions becomes so noticeable that it creates a sense of emotional dissonance inside you. You hear what they say, but the tone feels different. The words come out right, but the meaning feels wrong. Something feels off. And you can't explain it because they haven't done anything big enough to confront. But your spirit picks up the inconsistency before your mind can articulate it. You feel the tension. You feel the gap. You feel the shift growing wider. And once again, that is the Holy Spirit protecting you from blindness. One of the clearest examples of this in real life is when someone keeps insisting they're fine, but their behavior keeps revealing resentment. They say, everything's good, but they are shorter, colder, more distant, or more passive-aggressive. Their words say peace, but their actions say tension. Or someone says, I support you, but they stop showing up. They stop celebrating you. They stop participating in what matters to you. They might even still say the right things, but their presence no longer matches their confession. The gap widens, and you begin feeling the silent unraveling of trust. In many relationships, personal, professional, or spiritual, betrayal becomes visible through promises unkept. Not because someone forgot, but because someone stopped caring. They commit to something, helping, showing up, participating, being present, and then gradually withdraw their effort without explanation. At first, you give grace. Then you give patience. Then you give understanding. But at some point, you notice that you're giving what they're no longer giving back. You are carrying the relationship while they are coasting through it. And while they keep saying the right words, the actions reveal that your importance in their life has quietly decreased. People who are moving toward betrayal often rely heavily on words to maintain the appearance of connection. They want the relationship to look intact even though they've stopped investing in it internally. So they say things like, "You know I care," or "You can trust me," or "Nothing has changed," even as their behavior clearly indicates change. The inconsistency is not accidental. It is the symptom of a deeper shift happening in their heart. But this keynote is not only about identifying others. It's about learning spiritual wisdom. God teaches us that if someone's words and actions do not align, we must take the actions as truth, not because we want to judge them or condemn them, but because God designed actions to be the clearest reflection of a person's heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, but out of the direction of the heart, the life moves. Words speak emotion, actions speak intention. One of the most painful realizations you can experience is the moment when you finally accept that someone's actions have been telling the truth the entire time, even while their words kept trying to soften that truth. You begin replaying moments. You revisit conversations. You remember times when you felt something wasn't right, but you silenced your instincts because the words felt comforting. And you recognize that God had been showing you the truth all along through their behavior. There is a beautiful transformation that happens when you gain the wisdom to trust actions over declarations. You stop getting confused by mixed signals. You stop being manipulated by words without substance. You stop giving unlimited access to people whose behavior proves they cannot steward your trust. You begin protecting your peace. You begin recognizing that someone's behavior is their message. And you begin allowing God to remove relationships that were built on shallow words instead of consistent actions. Loyalty disappears when you're not useful. One of the clearest signs that betrayal is forming in someone's heart is when their loyalty suddenly weakens at the exact moment you no longer benefit them. It is a painful truth, but a necessary one. Some people are not committed to you. They are committed to the version of you that serves their needs. They are not loyal to your heart. They are loyal to your function. They don't love you for who you are. They love you for how you make their life easier. And the moment your usefulness changes, their loyalty begins to collapse. This type of betrayal is subtle because the shift doesn't happen when you're strong, influential, generous, or available. It happens when you need something back. When your life enters a more vulnerable season, when you require support instead of giving it, when you ask for presence instead of providing encouragement, that's when you see the truth of someone's heart. God uses seasons of need to expose relationships that were built on convenience instead of covenant. People who were close to you during your strength suddenly create distance during your struggle. Not because they're busy, not because they're overwhelmed, but because your usefulness to them has changed. In Scripture, Jesus experienced this kind of betrayal repeatedly. Crowds followed him everywhere, not because they understood him, but because they wanted something from him. They wanted miracles. They wanted healing. They wanted food. They wanted provision. As long as Jesus was multiplying bread, thousands stayed. But the moment he spoke truth that challenged them, the moment he stopped feeding their appetite and began feeding their spirit. The same people who celebrated him walked away. They didn't want Jesus. They wanted what Jesus could do for them. When the benefits stopped, their loyalty vanished. This is the pattern of every self-centered relationship. Loyalty based on benefits always collapses when the benefits stop flowing. In your own life, you may notice this when people show up for your victories, but disappear during your valleys. They thrive off what you give, not who you are. When you are the one encouraging, affirming, supporting, giving, they are attached. But the moment your season shifts and you're no longer pouring into them at the same level, they quietly detach. When you are useful, you are valuable. When you are honest about your weakness, you become disposable. This reveals a painful reality. Some people were never loyal to your soul, they were loyal to your service. One way this type of betrayal manifests is through selective support. A person may claim they care deeply for you, but pay attention to when they care. They care when it benefits them. They care when your success aligns with their agenda. They care when your presence makes their life easier. But when your presence requires compassion, patience, sacrifice, or effort, they withdraw. They begin to make excuses. They become inconsistent. They stop prioritizing you because you are no longer providing what they desire. Their loyalty was never love. It was convenience disguised as connection. This type of betrayal is especially painful because it exposes something most people don't want to admit. Usefulness can become a mask that hides someone's true motives. When you're doing well, when you're strong, when you're giving, you don't see their motives clearly because your usefulness creates an emotional glow that feels like love. But usefulness is not love. Support is not love unless it remains when support is no longer easy. Loyalty is not loyalty if it disappears the moment you stop providing value. People who love you for real stay when you struggle. They stay when you fail. They stay when you cannot give them anything. They stay when you are emotionally drained, financially limited, mentally exhausted, or spiritually confused. Real loyalty stays in the valley, not just the mountain. Real loyalty is covenant, not convenience. A person who only stands with you in strength is not loyal. They are opportunistic. They stay close enough to benefit, but not committed enough to sacrifice. When your usefulness shifts, that is when God reveals who is truly assigned to your life. Because usefulness acts like a filter. As long as you're useful, the wrong people will stay. But the moment your usefulness decreases, counterfeit connections fall away. God allows seasons where you feel empty so you can see who is still willing to pour. God allows seasons where you have nothing to give so you can see who still chooses to stay. God allows seasons of weakness so the strength of true loyalty can be tested. Another sign that loyalty is dependent on usefulness is when someone begins competing with you instead of celebrating you. When your success benefits them, they support you. But once your success grows beyond their control, once your purpose requires independence, once your calling starts shining in a way that no longer serves their ego, insecurity awakens. People who rely on your usefulness for validation will begin to resent you. When you no longer revolve around them, their loyalty is tied to how much attention they receive from your presence. When you shift into a season where your attention must go toward your healing, your calling, or your responsibilities, they feel threatened. And loyalty that resents your growth is not loyalty at all. Sometimes usefulness disguises itself as flattery. Someone may praise you excessively, not because they honor you, but because they want to remain close enough to extract something from you. Their compliments are currency. Their affirmation is part of their strategy to stay connected to the benefits you provide. But when you slow down the flow of benefits, your time, your energy, your support, their tone changes, their excitement fades, their affection cools, they begin mirroring your withdrawal because they were never fueled by love. They were fueled by gain. When loyalty disappears because usefulness disappears, what you're seeing is one of the purest forms of betrayal, conditional devotion. Conditional devotion says, I'm here as long as you're who I want you to be. Conditional devotion says, I'm loyal as long as you give me what I need. Conditional devotion says, I'm committed until commitment costs me something. But true devotion says, I'm with you because of who you are, not because of what you provide. True devotion remains even when the season changes. True devotion does not run away when responsibility appears. One of the hardest lessons God will ever teach you is how to stop trying to earn loyalty from people who only value your usefulness. You cannot force people with conditional hearts to give unconditional loyalty. You cannot convince someone to stay who only came for what they could take. You cannot heal someone's motives by giving them more of yourself. When God exposes this type of betrayal, loyalty tied to usefulness, the purpose is not to break you, but to free you. Free you from carrying people you were never meant to carry. Free you from serving relationships that drain your purpose. Free you from tying your worth to what you produce. When loyalty disappears because usefulness disappears, it reveals something else. Your value was never the problem. Their motive was the problem. Your heart was never the issue. Their intentions were never pure. People who walk away, when you slow down, were only walking with your momentum, not your mission. People who distance themselves when you struggle were only committed to your strength, not your soul. And while this truth hurts deeply, it also liberates, because once you recognize this pattern, you stop handing your heart to people who only want your hands. You stop giving your energy to people who drain it. You stop allowing relationships to survive off your generosity alone. You begin to understand that true loyalty is proven not when you are strong, but when you are weak. Not when you are full, but when you are empty. Not when you are useful, but when you have nothing to offer except yourself. Loyalty disappears when you're not useful. There are moments in life when pressure becomes so intense that you begin to wonder whether you are being crushed or being shaped. This keynote explores the profound truth that pressure is not always an enemy, and in many cases, it is the only force capable of revealing strength that you did not even know you possessed. When God uses pressure, it is never random, chaotic, or cruel. It is intentional, targeted, and deeply connected to the greater purpose that He designed specifically for your life. Most people misunderstand pressure because they see it as a sign that they are failing or losing control, but pressure in God's hands becomes a sacred tool. It becomes a divine instrument that awakens dormant resilience, clarifies priorities, refines character, and elevates a person into a version of themselves that could never have emerged in times of ease or comfort. God never applies pressure to destroy you. He applies pressure to distinguish you. Just as a diamond forms under unimaginable heat and compression, spiritual strength, emotional maturity, and inner authority are born through experiences that stretch you beyond what you thought you could handle. When you feel overwhelmed, it is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is often evidence that He trusts you enough to allow the difficult process that produces growth. Pressure exposes the gap between who you think you are and who you truly are. In comfort, illusions can survive, but pressure eliminates everything that is superficial, leaving only what is deep, authentic, and unshakable. Pressure also forces you to confront the limitations you have accepted for yourself. Many people carry invisible boundaries shaped by fear, trauma, insecurity, and past disappointments. They live inside self-made walls without realizing how much potential is imprisoned within them. When God applies pressure, those walls begin to crack. You are pushed into situations where you cannot rely solely on your old strengths, the familiar strategies, or the predictable environment. Pressure disrupts patterns that were holding you back, even though you were too accustomed to them to notice. Through discomfort, God moves you from stagnation into transformation, from fear into courage, and from limitation into expansion. Another dimension of pressure is its ability to reveal what you have been carrying that no longer belongs in your life. Stress, conflict, loss, and unexpected challenges function like spiritual X-rays. They show you which relationships are genuine and which are seasonal, which habits serve you and which sabotage you, which values are deeply rooted and which were merely borrowed or superficial. Without pressure, there is no differentiation. Pressure strips away the unnecessary, leaving you with clarity about what truly matters. Sometimes God allows a season of intense difficulty because you were holding on to people, identities, or environments that could not accompany you into the next stage of your purpose. Pressure forces separation, and although it feels painful, it ultimately protects you from carrying dead weight into your future. Pressure also activates creativity and resilience. In moments when everything seems constricted, God opens new ways of thinking and being. You begin to find solutions that were invisible before. You discover strength you never asked for, but desperately needed. You uncover perseverance that you did not realize lived inside you. When everything is easy, your mind remains passive, but when you face challenges that push you to the edge, you begin to innovate spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. God uses these moments to teach you to rely not on your own strength, but on His guidance, reminding you that breakthroughs do not come from human ability alone, but from divine partnership. One of the most powerful aspects of pressure is that it exposes your foundation. Anyone can appear strong when life is predictable, but true inner stability is tested only when external stability collapses. Pressure reveals whether your confidence is built on circumstances or on faith. It shows whether your peace depends on control or on trust. When God allows pressure, He is not trying to show you how weak you are, but how strong He can be through you. This is why some people look back on their most difficult seasons and realize they were actually the periods when they felt closest to God, because pressure eliminates distractions and forces you into deeper dependence. It is also important to understand that pressure is a sign of preparation. God does not prepare people for small assignments through comfort. He prepares them for great responsibilities through challenges that develop spiritual muscles. Every person who carries extraordinary purpose has walked through extraordinary pressure. The weight of what God is calling you to requires a different level of strength, discipline, and resilience. Pressure is the training ground for this elevation. When you are pushed beyond your natural limits, you begin to operate from a supernatural reservoir. When you feel stretched, God is enlarging your capacity. When you feel overwhelmed, He is expanding your potential. When you feel tested, He is solidifying your foundation. Pressure also teaches you patience and refinement. Growth rarely happens at the speed you desire. There are seasons when you want immediate change, instant relief, or rapid transformation. But God works in layers. He shapes you gradually through sustained pressure so that the strength He builds within you becomes permanent, not temporary. Quick victories produce quick collapses, but slow, intentional pressure creates unshakable inner authority. The longer you stay in the refining process, the deeper your roots grow, and the more impossible it becomes for circumstances to uproot you in the future. Another powerful truth is that pressure attracts grace. God never leaves you to face pressure alone. When the weight increases, so does divine support. When the challenges intensify, so does His presence. Pressure becomes the place where miracles happen because it brings you to the end of your own strength and into the beginning of His. Many breakthroughs happen when you are convinced you cannot endure any longer. At the edge of your endurance is where God reveals supernatural intervention. Pressure is the environment where faith becomes more than a belief. It becomes an experience. Furthermore, pressure reveals your voice. It forces you to speak truths that you previously avoided, to set boundaries that you previously ignored, and to reclaim authority that you previously surrendered. People often discover their courage only when circumstances push them to a point where remaining silent is no longer possible. Pressure forces you to articulate your values, confront injustice, advocate for yourself, and declare what you stand for. It awakens boldness that comfort suppresses. God uses these moments to show you that your voice carries weight and your presence has purpose. Pressure also deepens compassion. When you endure struggle, you begin to understand the suffering of others with new eyes. You expand emotionally. You develop empathy. You become slower to judge and quicker to support. God uses pressure not only to strengthen you, but to soften you in the right places. Hard times refine your character so that you can be a source of light, wisdom, and healing for others. The strength produced in pressure is not meant just for you. It becomes a resource you can offer to the world. Finally, pressure aligns you with destiny. You may think that pressure is delaying your progress, but in reality, it is preparing you for acceleration. Pressure does not interrupt God's plan, it activates it. Every struggle becomes part of the architecture of your purpose. Every challenge forms a piece of the identity you will need when you step into your calling. Pressure shapes you into someone who can handle the blessings, responsibilities, and influence that God has prepared for your future. There comes a moment in every believer's life when God has already spoken, already revealed, already exposed, already released, but the person still hesitates to walk away. Not because they didn't hear God, not because they doubt his clarity, but because the emotional ties, the familiar patterns, the fear of the unknown, or the internal conflict pulls them backward. This keynote explores one of the most challenging acts of obedience a person can face, having the courage to walk away from what God has already released you from. Whether it is a relationship that became toxic, a habit that keeps you spiritually stagnant, a mindset that holds you hostage, or a season that has already expired, the courage to walk away is often the gateway to the next dimension of purpose. There is a story in Scripture that beautifully illustrates this reality. When God told Abraham to leave his country, his family, and everything familiar, Abraham had a choice. He could stay in the comfort of what he knew or step into the uncertainty of what God promised. It is the same with every believer. God releases you from one place in order to lead you into another, but the transition requires courage. It requires the willingness to detach from what once felt secure so that your hands are free to receive what God has prepared next. Walking away is not a sign of weakness or defeat. It is often a sign of maturity, trust, and profound spiritual alignment. Most people fail to walk away not because they don't know they should, but because they underestimate the emotional gravity of old attachments. A familiar pain can feel safer than an unfamiliar future. A comfortable dysfunction can feel easier than stepping into growth that requires accountability, discipline, and faith. Many stay connected to what God has already released them from simply because leaving demands a version of courage they have never had to practice before. Obedience is rarely easy, but it is in the discomfort of obedience that spiritual strength is forged. When God releases you from something, He does so because it can no longer contribute to your purpose. Sometimes what used to bless you will eventually block you. What once supported you begins to limit you. What once felt like alignment becomes a source of confusion. Seasons have spiritual expiration dates, but humans often cling to what has expired out of nostalgia, fear, guilt, or misplaced loyalty. The courage to walk away is recognizing that God sees beyond what you currently understand. It is trusting that His release is protection, not punishment. It is believing that He removes what cannot go with you so He can make room for what is coming next. One of the most difficult aspects of walking away is that it often requires grieving. Even when something was harmful, there is grief attached to letting go of the familiar. You might grieve who you were in that season, the version of yourself that no longer fits your future. You might grieve relationships that were meaningful but no longer healthy. You might grieve dreams that made sense in one chapter but not in the next. Grieving is not a sign that you made the wrong choice. It is a natural part of releasing what God has already asked you to surrender. Courage does not mean you feel nothing. Courage means you move through the pain rather than return to what God already freed you from. Another challenge is that walking away often invites judgment from others. People around you might not understand why you refuse to stay in something that seems comfortable or familiar. They may question your decisions, criticize your boundaries, or misinterpret your obedience as rebellion or selfishness. But courage is built in moments where you honor what God spoke to you, even when others do not see the full picture. Faith is personal, and so is obedience. God will not always explain His instructions to the people around you. He will give the revelation to you and expect you to act on it with conviction. The courage to walk away includes the courage to be misunderstood. One of the most profound truths about walking away is that staying too long in the wrong place produces spiritual paralysis. You begin to lose clarity, confidence, strength, and direction. You feel the internal tension that something is off, but you convince yourself to endure it a little longer. What many people call endurance is actually avoidance. What they call loyalty is actually fear. And what they call patience is actually disobedience disguised as spirituality. When God releases you, staying becomes more painful than leaving because your spirit begins to resist what your flesh keeps trying to hold on to. Walking away also requires discernment. Not every closed door looks like a spiritual release. Not every difficult season means it is time to move on. But when God has truly released you, there are signs. Your peace becomes disrupted in a way that no amount of reasoning can restore. Your spirit becomes restless. The grace that once carried you in that environment begins to lift. Conversations feel heavier. The growth that once flowed effortlessly begins to stall. Internal conflict intensifies, not because you are wrong, but because the season has changed. Discernment is recognizing when the grace has shifted and responding with obedience. There is also spiritual warfare attached to walking away. When the enemy sees that you are close to stepping into the next level of your calling, he amplifies fear, doubt, confusion, and guilt. He tries to make you second guess what God already confirmed. He whispers that leaving will destroy you, that obedience will cost you too much, or that you are not strong enough to handle the unknown. The enemy's greatest weapon is uncertainty, but God's greatest gift is clarity. When God releases you, He does not always reveal the entire path, but He reveals enough to help you take the first step. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to move forward despite it. Walking away also involves reclaiming boundaries. When you have outgrown a season, your soul knows it before your mind fully accepts it. You become more aware of what drains you, what distracts you, and what diminishes you. You begin to see how certain connections no longer align with the person God is shaping you into. Courage means honoring those boundaries even when others do not understand them. It means protecting your peace, your purpose, your faith, your healing, and your mental and spiritual health. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is stewardship of the calling God entrusted to you. The courage to walk away also strengthens your spiritual identity. When you leave what God asked you to leave, you begin to rediscover who you truly are without the noise of old expectations or the weight of outdated roles. You reclaim your voice, your values, and your direction. You begin to recognize the difference between who others needed you to be and who God created you to be. Courage clears the space for identity to flourish. Walking away is also an act of worship. It is saying to God, I trust your voice more than my comfort. I trust your timing more than my emotions. I trust your plan more than my fears. It is worship expressed through action, surrender expressed through motion, and faith expressed through obedience. Every step away from what God released you from is a step toward what He has prepared for you. There is also an important truth that many people miss. When God releases you from something, He often releases someone else from you. Your obedience might be the catalyst for someone else's growth. Staying in a place you have outgrown can keep others stagnant. When you walk away, you create room for them to step into what God has prepared for them as well. Obedience is rarely isolated. It ripples outward. The courage to walk away prepares you for the courage to walk into the next season. The strength you build in letting go becomes the strength you will need to receive the next assignment. And what God brings after your obedience always carries greater clarity, greater peace, greater alignment, and greater purpose than what you left behind. When you look back across the journey we've explored in these 5 keynotes, you begin to see a pattern, a divine thread woven through every story, every struggle, every revelation. God is always speaking. God is always guiding. God is always revealing what is true and exposing what is false. And whether it is the subtle warning signs of betrayal, the hidden intentions of people around you, the pressure that God uses to develop your strength, the moments when He calls you to release what no longer serves your purpose, or the courage required to walk away from what He already closed the door on, every single part of the process is designed to shape you into the person He created you to be. This entire message is not just about spotting betrayal, it is about learning to see spiritually instead of emotionally, because betrayal is rarely just about people. It is about alignment. It is about recognizing what pulls you away from purpose, what drains your spirit, what weakens your identity, and what distances you from the voice of God. When you see betrayal not as a personal attack, but as a divine redirection, you begin to reclaim the power the enemy hoped to steal from you. You begin to understand that God allows certain things to be exposed, not to shame you, but to protect you. Not to weaken you, but to strengthen you. Not to wound you, but to wake you up. Everything God exposes, He exposes so He can heal. Everything He allows to fall apart, He allows because it was not built to carry the next season of your life. Everything He pressures so it can be refined. Everything He releases you from, He releases so you can step into something greater. Betrayal may break your heart, but it can never break your destiny. Loss may shake your emotions, but it cannot shake God's purpose for you. Letting go may feel painful, but it positions you for what is coming. You were not created to live attached to what God has already removed. You were not designed to stay loyal to patterns that keep you small. You were not born to remain in environments that minimize your calling or drain your faith. You were created for courage, for discernment, for strength under pressure, for divine alignment, and for spiritual authority. And every time God exposes a red flag, every time He reveals a false intention, every time He allows pressure to shape you, every time He nudges you to walk away, He is preparing you for a future that is bigger than the betrayal you survived, bigger than the pain you endured, and bigger than the season you are leaving behind. Your healing is tied to your obedience. Your clarity is tied to your surrender. Your elevation is tied to your willingness to trust God even when your heart is uncertain. You may have walked through betrayal, but you are walking out with wisdom. You may have experienced pressure, but you are emerging with strength. You may have had to walk away, but you are stepping toward purpose. God never wastes what hurt you. He transforms it. He builds with it. He uses it. And when you finally see how God turns betrayal into clarity, pressure into power, endings into beginnings, and release into redirection, you will understand that nothing was taken from you that God will not replace with something greater.